Picture two driveways on the same street. In one sits a 4-year-old Honda Accord paid for in cash, unremarkable in every way. In the other sits a brand new $47,000 SUV, still wearing its dealer plates, still catching the morning light. The two people who own these cars earn the same salary. They work the same hours. They will retire in the same year. And 3 decades from now, the gap between their net worth will be larger than either of them earns in a decade. Nobody will be able to point to the moment it happened, because it did not happen at once. It accrued at about $700 a month, silently, in the background of two otherwise ordinary lives for 3 decades. Here's the strange part. On the morning both cars were purchased, the person in the expensive SUV looked like the one who had it figured out. Confidence, comfort, a car that announced a certain arrival. The person in the Accord looked like someone who had settled. Every instinct we have says the SUV was the smarter, more successful choice. The math says something almost insulting in how completely it disagrees. This video will not tell you which car to buy. It will do something more useful and slightly more uncomfortable, which is to run the entire calculation both drivers should have run before either of them signed anything. Let us establish the two drivers cleanly, because the honesty of the conclusion depends entirely on the honesty of the setup. Both are 30 years old. Both earn $70,000 a year. Both have roughly $900 left over each month, once rent, food, and the ordinary business of being alive are paid for. The first driver buys the used Accord outright for $16,000, money saved patiently over 2 years. No loan, no interest, no monthly payment. Insurance on a reliable older car with a clean record runs $110 a month. The second driver buys the new SUV for $47,000, puts $9,000 down, and finances the remaining $38,000 over 72 months at 7% interest. That produces a monthly payment of $648. Insurance on a new financed vehicle runs another $185. The total monthly cost of the SUV is $833. The total monthly cost of the Accord is about $130. So let us add up what the expensive car actually costs, because the payment is only the opening line of a much longer invoice. Start with the loan itself. $38,000 borrowed at 7% over 6 years means the second driver will hand the lender roughly $46,700 in total. That is nearly $8,700 in pure interest, paid for the privilege of driving a car he could not quite afford to buy outright. But interest is the polite, visible cost. The brutal one is depreciation, and it is the single largest expense in car ownership that almost nobody writes into a budget. A new $47,000 vehicle loses roughly 20% of its value in the first year alone. That is about $9,400 gone before the new car smell has faded. By the third year, that SUV is worth somewhere near $26,000. The second driver paid $47,000 for it. He has lost around $21,000 in value in 36 months. Which is more than the first driver paid for his entire car. And none of that includes fuel, tires, or the maintenance that every vehicle eventually demands. This is not a fringe scenario, by the way. It is the American baseline. The average new car transaction price in the United States sat near $47,000 at the end of 2024, according to Kelley Blue Book. The average new car monthly payment climbed to $737, according to Experian. And the American Automobile Association, which has tracked this number for decades, put the true all-in annual cost of owning a new vehicle at $12,182 a year. Our second driver is not being reckless. He is being completely, statistically normal. That is precisely the problem. Now look at the space between the two budgets, because this is where the entire video actually lives. The first driver spends about $130 a month on his car. The second spends $833. The difference between them is roughly $700 every single month. The first driver does something unglamorous with that $700. He does not upgrade his lifestyle. He does not notice it at all. He simply routes it automatically into a low-cost total market index fund and forgets it exists. The second driver routes his $700 to the lender and the insurance company. On the surface, nothing dramatic is happening. One man is making a car payment, the other is making a deposit. It looks like a rounding error in two ordinary lives. It is not. It is the hinge on which the next 30 years turn. To see why, we have to let time do the one thing time does better than anything else, which is compound. Assume the invested gap earns 8% a year on average, which is a deliberately conservative stand-in for the long-run return of a broad American stock index before inflation. $700 a month, invested at 8% for 10 years, becomes about $128,000. That is the first checkpoint. 10 years in, the first driver has $128,000 that did not exist before, built entirely out of the money the second driver spent on being comfortable. The second driver, meanwhile, has made his payments, traded the aging SUV for a newer one, restarted the depreciation clock, and has, from the car budget, precisely $0 invested. The $128,000 gap at year 10 came from one decision made in a dealership on an ordinary afternoon. Now run that same gap forward for 30 years, and the number stops being intuitive and starts being almost unbelievable. $700 a month at 8% for 30 years grows to approximately $1,043,000. That is not a typo, and it is not a trick. It is simply what happens when a modest monthly difference is given 3 decades and left completely alone. At age 60, the first driver has just over $1 million in investments that exist for one reason and one reason only, which is that at 30 he bought a boring car. The second driver, at 60, has cycled through a series of nice vehicles, absorbed roughly $100,000 in combined depreciation and interest across those years, and has nothing from his car budget to show for it except the memory of always having driven something new. That is the real math, not the sticker price, not the payment. The 30-year compounding consequence of a single afternoon. A calculation that stops at the $1 million number is only showing you one column of the ledger, and a one-column ledger is not accounting, it is propaganda. So let us fill in the other column honestly, because the second driver did not set fire to his money. He bought a genuine stream of things. Reliability is one of them. A vehicle under warranty carries predictable costs, and a 10-year-old car is entirely capable of presenting a 4-figure repair bill on the least convenient morning of your year. Safety is another, improving with almost every model cycle. Utility is a third. An SUV that actually hauls a family, tows a trailer, and shrugs off a hard winter is performing work a small sedan simply cannot. And comfort is the fourth, which sounds trivial until you remember that a long commute is measured in real hours subtracted from a real life, and that spending them in something pleasant is not a character flaw. Which brings us to the concept the whole video has been circling, and it is an old one in economics. The expensive car is not a mistake, it is a luxury, and luxuries are perfectly rational purchases for a thinking adult to make, on one condition, which is that they are priced. A luxury you have priced and chosen anyway is a purchase you can defend for the rest of your life. A luxury you never priced is not something you bought at all. It is something that happened to you while you were looking at the trim options. The $47,000 sticker was never the real problem. The real problem is a $1 million luxury quietly wearing a $648 price tag and a buyer who never once asked to see the true one. So here's the only car buying rule that survives contact with the math, and it fits in a single sentence. Take the monthly gap between the car you want and a reliable used car that would get you to the same places. Multiply that gap out across 30 years of compounding. Look directly at the number that comes back, and only then decide whether the car is worth it. That is the entire framework. Not the payment, not the interest rate, not the trim level, and certainly not what your neighbors will think when you pull in. Just the 30-year cost of the difference between what you are about to choose and what you could choose instead. Almost nobody runs that calculation before they buy. The small number of people who do tend to make very different decisions, and they tend, 30 years later, to be very glad they did. Both drivers ended up with something real. The first has a forgettable car and a 7-figure account that no one on the street will ever see, envy, or compliment. The second has 3 decades of new car comfort and a garage that always looked the part. Neither of those outcomes is wrong on its face. The difference between the two men was never taste, and it was never discipline. It was information. Only one of them ever saw the true price of the thing he was choosing, and that visibility, not the car, and not even the portfolio, is the real asset here. So, the most important question at any dealership was never what is the monthly payment. It is this. What does the difference between this car and a sensible one cost me across 30 years? And am I paying that price deliberately? Ask it out loud before you sign, because a cost you have looked at squarely is a choice, and a cost you have never looked at is simply a bill that has not arrived yet. Understanding money is your best defense.